Hi there. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is. As always, happy whatever day it is, and welcome. I'm Larry Erickson. This is the Erickson Report. And we start with this: a threshold crossed. Israeli authorities and the crimes of apartheid and persecution. That's the title of a new report from Human Rights Watch, probably the world's most prominent international human rights organization. The detailed 213-page document condemns, quoting the report, the overarching Israeli government policy to maintain the domination by Jewish Israelis over Palestinians and grave abuses committed against Palestinians living in the occupied territories, including East Jerusalem, which meets the standard for apartheid under international law. We'll let Human Rights Watch explain itself.
Apartheid. While many associate the word with South Africa, apartheid is a universal legal term that refers to severe discriminatory oppression. Apartheid is also a crime against humanity. Its definition in the 1973 Apartheid Convention and the 1998 Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court is made up of three key elements: an intent to maintain the domination by one racial group over another, systematic oppression by one racial group over another, and one or more inhumane acts as part of that oppression. Persecution is a crime against humanity under the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. It is made up of two primary elements: a discriminatory intent leading to severe deprivation of fundamental rights of a racial, ethnic, or other group. On the basis of these definitions and its research, Human Rights Watch finds that Israeli authorities are committing the crimes against humanity of apartheid and persecution. Human Rights Watch finds that the elements of the crimes come together in the occupied Palestinian territory, pursuant to an Israeli government policy to maintain the domination by Jewish Israelis over Palestinians across Israel and the occupied territory. In the occupied territory, that intent has been coupled with systematic oppression and inhumane acts committed against Palestinians living there. The Israeli government is the main authority across Israel and the occupied Palestinian territory. In these areas, Israeli officials have demonstrated a discriminatory intent to maintain domination over Palestinians by ensuring control over land and demographics by Jewish Israelis. Take the Jerusalem municipality as an example. The Israeli authorities' goal is to maintain a sizable Jewish majority by boxing in Palestinian areas while helping predominantly Jewish areas to flourish. Israeli authorities maintain a two-tier system which privileges Jewish Israelis over Palestinians. The means used by Israeli authorities in the occupied territory amount to the systematic oppression needed to establish the crime of apartheid. Israeli authorities have committed a range of abuses against Palestinians. In the occupied territory, those abuses include mass land confiscation, the denial of residency rights, and the suspension of civil rights, and rise to the threshold of inhumane acts and severe abuses of the fundamental rights of Palestinians. The international community should recognize the reality on the ground for what it is and press the Israeli authorities to end apartheid and persecution.
It's important to note that this is not the first occasion of this. In January, the Israeli civil rights group B'Tselem issued its own report, which reached the same conclusion as this one did. And in fact, 4 years ago, in 2017, the UN's Economic and Social Commission for Western Asia said the same thing, only to have the UN Secretary General cave under US and Israeli pressure and disassociate the United Nations from the work of its own agency. So the finding is not new. The facts are not new. What is different and significant now is the prominence of the speaker. Now, I intend to have more on this next time. Instead, we're moving on to a different topic, where in another assault on the economic health of American workers, claims of worker shortages are being used by a dozen states with right-wing governments to justify ending participation in the $300 federal unemployment supplemental benefit. They claim that this extra money makes life too easy for the unemployed, makes them unwilling to work, and so we have to force them to go back to work by making them suffer. South Carolina was the first to pull the trigger on this, followed quickly by Montana. Alabama, Arkansas, Idaho, Iowa, Mississippi, Missouri, North Dakota, Texas, Utah, and Wyoming make up the rest of this still subject to expansion list. Meanwhile, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce is calling on the Congress to cancel the entire program, making the same claims about worker shortages and the overpaid unemployed. Even the White House is slouching toward the lazy unemployed argument as Joe Biden has directed the Labor Secretary to help put in place work search requirements in the 21 states that don't currently have them. He declared at a presser, quoting, "We're going to make it clear that anyone collecting unemployment who was offered a suitable job must take the job or lose the benefits." This is all despite the fact that several studies, including one by the National Bureau of Economic Research and another out of Yale University, found that the extra benefits had only a limited impact on worker supply and likely did not discourage work. And those reports were from a time when the benefit was $600, double what it is now. It's also despite this very salient fact that those supplemental benefits got spent. They were a clear factor in driving the degree of economic recovery that we have seen. But facts, of course, mean nothing to corporate America and the right wing, not when there is a possibility of screwing workers at hand. The thing is, though, here's the thing. If it's true that workers are hard to come by, which probably isn't, but if it's true that workers are hard to come by, employers could respond by offering them more. I mean, isn't that how supply and demand is supposed to work? If the supply of labor is not big enough to meet the demand for labor, doesn't that increase the market value of labor? If, as they claim, not working is preferable to working, even if that's true, shouldn't that create incentives to make working more attractive? But of course, that's not how right-wingers and corporations think. Their preferred course is always to make those workers' lives so miserable that they'll take whatever they're offered. They could drive down to the lowest wage that, whatever the lowest wage for that position is, that the bosses can get them to accept. But even corporations sometimes have to bend to economic reality, which brings you to the news that Chipotle has announced that its pay for restaurant workers is being increased. Starting pay will now range between $11 and $18 an hour, and the average pay for new and existing workers will reach $15 an hour by the end of June. And where one goes, others may follow. Consider an example of what some used to call enlightened self-interest, so long as you remember that being enlightened doesn't mean that it's not ultimately about self-interest. It also reminds me, as economic news often does, of the truth of an aphorism I came across some years ago while browsing in a bookstore. Unfortunately, I can't remember the author because I'd like to give credit where it's due, but I do remember the quote. "The problem with welfare isn't that welfare pays too much, it's that working pays too little." And the truth is, it still does. All right, next up, we have the return of two old features which you haven't seen in a while. The first one is Everything You Need to Know, where you can learn a great deal about something in a very short time. In this case, it's everything you need to know about the degree of harassment LGBTQ people experience online in just 3 sentences. The LGBTQ rights group GLAAD released its first social media safety index on May 10th. It originally intended to individually grade what it called the LGBTQ user safety experience of Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, and YouTube. But it changed course when it realized that all 5 would get an F. And that is everything you need to know. All right, and then there is the Hero Award, which is something given out simply for having done the right thing. This time the award goes to the journalists at WITF, an all-news public radio station in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Now, I note at the top that much of this is actually drawn from a column by Washington Post media columnist Margaret Sullivan. Credit where it's due. In the wake of the 2020 election, and even in the wake of the attack on the Capitol on January 6th, most of the Sunday news shows continue to book people like Kevin McCarthy, Ted Cruz, and Ron Johnson without reminding viewers that these people tried to overthrow that election, spreading and encouraging lies about non-existent fraud. They've been ready to simply forget, let bygones be bygones, and act as if the attack on the Capitol that these bozos provoked and took part in never happened. A rare exception and a secondary co-winner of the Hero Award is CNN's State of the Union, which hasn't booked a single member of the Sedition Caucus since January. But the folks at Harrisburg's WITF have gone further. They not only refuse to forget, they insist that you remember. So in late January, the station, whose newsroom includes 6 reporters and 2 editors, the station posted a statement reminding their audience that some state legislatures in Pennsylvania signed a letter urging Congress to vote against certifying the state's election results, and that some members of Congress actually did vote against certifying those state results. And this is despite having absolutely no evidence to support their fraudulent claims of fraud. These elected officials, WITF said, either knowingly spread disinformation or flat out lied as part of, quoting, an unprecedented assault on the fabric of American democracy. And they weren't going to forget that, and they weren't going to let you forget it either. Since then, they've done just that by simply and without fanfare, including language about how given lawmakers conducted themselves during the attempts to overturn the election whenever that legislator comes up in ordinary news coverage. WITF expects to continue this process at least through the 2020 elections, perhaps through 2024. If legislators change their minds, if they retract their statements, the station will reflect that in their language, but they won't simply wipe the slate clean for them. In other words, in Margaret Sullivan's words, no memory hole, no just let's move on, and sorry, no amnesty. And that makes the journalists at WITF in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, heroes. All right, one quick thing before the break, something to be noted in passing. I have often said that we are uninformed, malinformed, and misinformed by our major news media. Consider this to be filed under that heading. The end of April to the first days of May marked the 50th anniversary of Mayday, the largest nonviolent civil disobedience action in U.S. history. 7,000 were arrested on May 3rd, 14,000 over the course of the week. Now, admittedly, I can only do website searches. Something like LexisNexis is simply something I can't afford. But I found no mention of this anniversary in the New York Times, the Washington Post, MSNBC, CBS News. In fact, the best a search for this turned up in terms of major media was a single opinion column in the Philadelphia Inquirer. And we wonder why Americans are so ignorant of history. Time for a break. And we are back, with our regular segment, 2 Weeks of Stupid, Clowns and Outrages. And we start, as usual, with the clowns. On April 29th, 85 Christian leaders demanded that self-proclaimed Christian prophets apologize for perpetuating false claims about the 2020 presidential election and for their false predictions that Tweety Pie would return to power by a certain date that now has long passed. In response, the next day, one of those self-proclaimed prophets, megachurch pastor Johnny Enlow, posted on Facebook a claim that he had just had a vision from God proving that Tweety Pie actually is still the president. The vision was that of the great orange one, Enlow said, seated on a throne holding a golden scepter with a golden crown on his head. This reflecting, quoting again, Tweety Pie's present, and it was in all caps, present status from heaven's perspective. There is only the legitimacy of Trump. God has assigned a massive contingency of angels to that scepter and that crown, he bombasted. Now, I had not experienced Johnny Enlow before, but he is one real piece of work. Before the election, he flat out predicted, based on, he insisted, visions from God, that Tweety Pie would win. When that didn't happen, on November 30th, he said Tweety Pie had the authority to impose martial law and to arrest and execute for treason anyone in the opposition. On December 11th, he claimed that God told him that Tweety Pie got 88 million votes and carried 45 states. On January 22nd, Tweety Pie had gotten a promotion. He is, according to Enlow, quote, recognized from heaven as the primary government leader on planet Earth. By March 29th, Tweety Pie's win had escalated to 49 states, although it's unclear why the Almighty could not get the figure straight. And the plans for fraud, he said, all this fraud, it was actually known before the election. And the reason those plans were not exposed before the election was that the entire 2020 presidential election was actually one big sting operation to expose the treasonous fraudsters. And military intelligence knows all about this, and the truth is going to come out very soon. On April 19th, Enlow insisted that Tweety Pie is still president, but he's not in the White House now because he was taken by God to go on an assignment from God, which I thought was actually the Blues Brothers, but never mind. But now, according to Enlow, he's working with the archangels Michael, Gabriel, and Zedekiah in order to take down members of the evil cabal that is secretly controlling world events. And now, most recently, we have the Golden Crown and Scepter. As a fitting conclusion to this brief trips into the depths of paranoia, true to his right-wing fantasies, Enlow wrapped up that Facebook post by claiming that he is a persecuted victim, now being pressured by those 85 Christian leaders to abandon God. We do live in scary times. They may be clowns, but sometimes they're evil clowns. All right, next, appearing on Sean and Sanity's show on May 5th, Caitlyn Jenner bemoaned the state of the economy and declared that she wants to fight the homeless. Not homelessness, the homeless. Because the effect of the economy that she bemoaned was the impact on the owners of private airplane hangars who can't stand seeing homeless people. Quoth her, my friends are leaving California. My hangar, the guy right across from me, he was packing up his hangar. And I said, where are you going? And he said, I'm moving to Sedona, Arizona. I can't take it anymore. I can't walk down the street and see homeless. I don't want to leave, she continued. Either I stay and fight or I get out of here. Jenner, the former Olympic champion and reality TV star and now California governor wannabe, got deservedly ratioed into oblivion for this. And yes, I know I'm using the term incorrectly because the original was not a tweet, but the spirit remains, and so I actually don't care. Yes, sometimes the clowns are evil, sometimes they're just clowns. But if you have any concept that there is such a thing as reality, here's one that should leave you questioning it. On her faux news show on May 6th, Laura Ingraham reached beyond her usual dementia to go completely wonko. The kids' education site, Brain Pop, had a segment teaching kids about they and them, pronouns embraced by many non-binary people, and which in fact have long been acceptable, if untraditional, forms of the third-person singular for a person of unknown gender. But to Ingraham, the whole concept is very insidious. Not even because, as you might expect, it advances the radical LGBTQ agenda, but because, quoting her now, it kind of takes the kids away from their family setting, or maybe their religious values, whether you're Muslim or Christian or Jewish, what you have you, and breaks that bond. The goal is to break the bond with the nuclear family. Yeah, that's right. Laura Ingraham thinks referring to an individual as they destroys both family, the nuclear family, and religious values. And I do not have a level of clown to describe that. This last one, I should have pity on it because it's such a self-own, but it's too much fun to let pass. On April 21st, Texas Senator Ted Cruz tweeted thusly, "The Green New Deal will destroy the American energy industry as we know it." And the truth is, even Teddy should have seen what was coming. Among the many responses, my three personal favorites are, number 3, the electric light bulb will destroy the American whale oil lamp industry as we've known it. Number 2, okay, Ted, but what's the downside? And my number one favorite response, your terms are acceptable. Sometimes you wind up feeling sorry for them. But moving on to the outrages, we start at the Centner Academy in Miami, Florida, a private K-8 school founded by an anti-vaxxer. On April 26, Leila Centner, who co-founded the academy with her husband David in 2019 in order to have a school with medical freedom from vaccines, informed parents of the 300 students that the school will not hire anyone who has received the COVID vaccine. Teachers and staff who have already gotten the vaccine were told to continue reporting to school, but stay separated from any students. Since reopening in September, the school has refused to follow the, quote, tyrannic, unquote, guidelines from the CDC. Now, to demonstrate her grasp of basic reality, in a statement to AP defending this decision, Centner made the biologically impossible claim that unvaccinated women have had miscarriages and other reproduction problems as a result of simply standing near a vaccinated person. Okay, so why is this under outrages rather than clowns? Because of this. Following Centner's statement on AP, the agency also quoted Dr. Aileen Marty, an infectious disease specialist with Florida International University's Wertheim College of Medicine. She said that there is no evidence that unvaccinated people face any risks from the vaccinations of others. The very fact that such a thing needs to be said at all shows how bad things have gotten, how far the stupidity, the maddening, infuriating, dangerous, willful ignorance of people like the Centners and the people who send their kids to a school like that has spread, how far this has penetrated our culture and our society. And yes, that is an outrage. In fact, you really want to know how bad this anti-vaxxer bull has gotten? Well, I'll tell you. On April 24th, anti-vaxxers protesting in the United Kingdom were photographed wearing paper versions of a Star of David with no COVID on them. Yeah, you got this. You're not misunderstanding here. You are not misunderstanding. These assholes are literally comparing themselves to Jews massacred in the Holocaust and public health agencies to Nazis running death camps. In fact, the man pictured here called the photographer a Nazi because she was wearing a mask. And this is not new. 2 years ago, in April 2019, the Anti-Defamation League reported that some anti-vaxxers were wearing a yellow Star of David with the words "No Vax" to symbolize their supposed persecution by public health rules. The Auschwitz Memorial responded to this latest offense by saying, quoting now, "Using the tragedy of Jews who suffered, were humiliated, marked with a yellow star, and finally isolated in ghettos and murdered during the Holocaust in order to argue against vaccination that saves human lives is a sad symptom of moral and intellectual decline." I can only say that the people at the Auschwitz Memorial Museum were far more polite, far more restrained than any reaction I can manage. These people are not only profoundly ignorant, they are morally and ethically contemptible. Outrage indeed. All right, our last outrage, presented here because it comes with a footnote. Idaho has enacted legislation that, while it never uses the term, effectively bans all public schools in the schools in this state, including colleges and universities, from discussing critical race theory, an academic discipline that considers how issues of race intersect broader social, cultural, and legal issues. Considers, that is, systemic racism, not so much the racism of individuals, but the racism built into the structures of society that can function to oppress and deny, even without the intention or even the awareness of the members of that society. Now, critical race theory, while well within the range of accepted academic discussions, is somewhat controversial and does have its own critics. But the ultimate point of this bill is actually not to ban discussion of critical race theory in Idaho schools, but to ban discussion of racism, to ban discussion of white privilege, all wrapped up in the sugar-coated language of unity and well-being and the Hallmark card sentimentality of no one is better than anyone else, the better to avoid asking if we actually behave as if that's true. It's bigoted, it's cowardly, and it's an outrage. But here's the footnote. It doesn't exist in isolation, of course. Texas is already looking to follow Idaho. Meanwhile, a flood of bills targeting abortion rights, voting rights, LGBTQ rights, all of which I've mentioned at least once, and protest rights, which I intend to address at some length in the near future, they're all on a conveyor belt of reaction in states run by right-wingers. This avalanche of legislation did not start from the 2020 elections, but it was accelerated by it. So often it seems we can't even keep up. But what we need to keep in mind is why they're in such a rush, why they're pushing so hard so fast. It's because they are losing. They are losing and they know it. They are on the wrong side of change, the wrong side of progress, the wrong side of history. They are King Canute demanding the tide turn back, and they know it. This is the same as the spate of laws and state constitutional amendments banning same-sex marriage in the early 2000s. Between 2004 and 2006, 20 states adopted such measures before they were all obviated by Obergefell v. Hodges in 2015. Now, it was said that those measures got pushed because same-sex marriage was a useful hot-button issue, but it was a hot-button issue precisely because the times they were a-changin' and the right wing knew it, perhaps best illustrated by the fact that at the time of Obergefell, the number of states specifically banning any form of same-sex union had dropped from a peak of 25 to just 13. Now, I don't expect things to move as quickly or change as dramatically as they did or at least seem to happen with same-sex marriage. But yes, the moral arc of the universe that Martin Luther King liked to talk about is bending in the right direction. So have strength, keep the faith, and carry it on. That's it for me. We are out of here. I will see you in 2 weeks. In the meantime, have the best 2 weeks you possibly can. And as always, peace.